Welcome to Lead for Good, a podcast for nonprofit leaders of all titles and all experience levels. This is a show where the audience will meet and get to know top nonprofit leaders. Together, we will take a deep dive into nonprofit leadership, endeavoring to uncover and unpack the most important characteristics, traits, strategies, and actions of successful nonprofit leaders. Through this journey together, we desire to help you, the nonprofit leader, grow your knowledge and capabilities to lead for good. We want you to achieve your full potential as leaders in the sector. So, welcome to the conversation. We're glad you joined us today. Without further delay, let's join our host, Chris Looney, as he interviews yet another extraordinary leader who is truly leading for good. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Lead for Good, a show for nonprofit leaders of all titles, all experience levels. My name is Chris Looney. I have the good fortune to be your host for this deep dive into nonprofit leadership. Our show endeavors to cover the most important nonprofit leadership topics with the goal of helping the audience reach their full potential as nonprofit leaders. Today, we welcome Dr. Stefanie Johnson, best-selling author, professor, leader of the Leadership Center at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and one of the smartest and most well-respected voices in organizational management in our sector. And I've known Dr. Johnson, Stefanie, for many years now, and I know the audience is in for a treat with this interview. So welcome to the show, Stefanie.
Thank you so much.
You bet. We look forward to learning from you and taking advantage of all of those nonprofit leadership lessons you've learned so far on your leadership journey. And speaking of leadership, let's start there with yours. Please tell us a little bit about how you became the leader you are today.
Thanks. That's such a great question. So, I would say as a researcher, I probably came to leadership in a really different way because I studied the topic of leadership. I honestly did my college senior thesis on charismatic leadership and my master's and then my PhD all on the same topic of leadership. So I feel like I know or, knew so much about the topic, but really it's so different to read it and research it and study than to actually do leadership.
Yeah, the intellectual understanding of leadership versus the practical application.
Yeah, so then with the base, I guess, research knowledge combined with starting to, just take on leadership roles, fail, make lots of mistakes, learn from those mistakes, adjust accordingly, especially in different arenas, which is another thing I'm sure you're experiencing because as you move from maybe sector to sector, or even organization to organization, sure. It's like a whole new bag every time.
Well said. Yeah. Apples to oranges, right? In almost every different leadership role.
I think just, trying to experience and expose myself to as many different opportunities as possible. And I think leaders are learners. That's a famous quote by, I can't remember who, continuing to try to improve and get better and keep up with the times. I mean, that's another thing. If you stayed in the same organization for 50 years, the whole world has been changing around us. So it's just constantly iterating and trying to get better and do the right thing and do good, consistent with your podcast name. So I think that's it.
Especially in this sector, right? I mean, you in your role in the Leadership Center deal with the topic of leadership as it relates to for-profit leadership as well as nonprofit leadership, of course, and there's some big differences there as well. Yeah,
absolutely. It's kind of interesting because so I'm in a university setting, which we are nonprofits, and we are at the Center for Leadership have a advisory board of these really top leaders. And it's so fun because so many of them come from for-profit sectors and, they're asking these questions about scalability and market share and all those things, they're great lessons for nonprofits. learn.
Totally
Yeah.
appropriate.
But
Right.
it's just not typically how we think about market share of our students. Like they're students with those who want to learn can learn, but I think it's a useful perspective.
Yeah, 100% true. And it's the same dynamic that exists with any board of a nonprofit where, for example, you have this nonprofit, you have a board, and those board members typically are not nonprofit leaders. They are almost exclusively for-profit
Yeah.
philanthropists or leaders themselves or whatever they are, but their background, their exposure, experience, expertise is primarily in the for-profit world, and they bring that perspective, and it's challenging, and oftentimes they have to learn what's different and what's unique about the
Yeah,
nonprofit sector,
absolutely.
right? Yeah, that's good. Well, what's been your favorite professional role, and what made it so meaningful? And I think this is going to be a challenging question because you have been an author, you've been, a leader of a leadership center, you've been a professor. I mean, what's your favorite?
That is a really hard question. I think this time right now at leading the Center for Leadership is, I think this is my favorite, maybe in the moment kind of perspective, but because just the impact that we're having at such a large scale of,
Right.
the University of Colorado has over 30,000 students. It's huge.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's my
30,000. Oh my gosh,
undergrad
I
have
had no idea.
1,000. So it's just a really big,
Yeah.
the opportunity is really huge. And the University of Colorado was listed as in Time Magazine's list of the top 100 universities for developing leaders, not because of the Center for Leadership, but historically, we have been successful at growing and placing really successful leaders in government, politics, media, arts and entertainment, business, et cetera. So we have
That's
big
it.
shoes to fill, right? We know the potential's there. So what can we do to even further develop students into a learning mindset to grow and develop their leadership? So I think the opportunity is huge, but then, also like the pressure's on. It's like a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. Big responsibility that you have, big opportunity, big impact, and super exciting to think about having the opportunity to groom the
Yeah,
leaders of
exactly.
tomorrow, right?
And
And
we have,
to take on some of these huge
yeah.
challenges that we all
And I feel
face.
like our students tend to be extremely politically engaged and socially engaged. We have these statistics that we brag about, like voter registration. Our students are quite active. Peace Corps volunteers with, one of the top schools for Peace Corps, and lots of other metrics like that. So knowing that, I just feel like we can actually have a broader impact on the way the world's functioning by helping our students go out and do good and be good and give them some skills to do so.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I love that. You've obviously benefited mightily throughout your career from having good mentors, leaders to look up to. Who were some of the important mentors that kind of shaped and influenced
Oh,
the
I
leader you
love
are
that
today?
question. So I had a couple of college advisors, Ron Riggio and Susan Murphy. Susan was like my assigned freshman advisor, and Ron Riggio was,
Neat.
I tried to get in his class, when I was a college student, and he didn't let me in, but he said, if you really want to study this topic, which is industrial organizational psychology, you could take my class
Yeah.
whenever you get in. I'm not going to let you in, but why don't you do some research on the topic? And so I think those two individuals were just really huge. I don't know that I, would have really had the opportunities that I had without those people, without those two. And then I went on to do my PhD.
Right.
I had an advisor, Bob Du Bois, Nikki Hebel, again, just like really shaped my life. And and I
Mm.
think everyone has these stories, right? Like I've never met a
Sure, of course.
successful person who doesn't have a story of the person who saw a spark in them and believed in them and said their name in rooms where they weren't sitting. and was just really instrumental at teaching them the things they needed, right? And so
Yeah.
with that in mind, like that's one of the biggest things that we focus on at the center is pairing students with mentors in the community, because
Yeah.
not everyone gets that opportunity. Like I went to this, like I said, a school with 1,000 students, so maybe I had more of an opportunity to interact with faculty, but not every student does.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, you just have to broaden the universe of
Yeah,
potential mentors, right? But it's exciting to think about the intentionality of being a mentor to as many people as you possibly can
for sure.
yourself, right? Knowing how important and how critical and vital it is to raising up good
Yeah.
leaders, right? Like, wow, knowing that I need to do more. I need to be more resourceful or be a better
Yeah,
resource
for
to more
sure.
people.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, so like over the years, you've come to study leadership, you've come to practice leadership, and you must have some
Uh-huh.
philosophies around what nonprofit leadership should look like, or guiding philosophies to help you navigate your own role in as a leader. So what is that
Yeah.
philosophy for you, or what's incorporated in that
Okay, I
philosophy for
love
you?
that. So I'm going to give you the real answer is, um, I think it's servant leadership. That's there's all these theories of
Awesome.
leadership, and that's the one that really resonates with me. I definitely for nonprofits, it makes sense, but I actually feel like it is the definition of leadership is serving, growing and developing your team. Like for me, that is what leadership is. I don't know what you're doing if you're not doing that. So,
Right.
but maybe
Right.
that's
Right.
closed-minded, because what I studied, I think I mentioned for my undergrad thesis and my master's thesis, I studied charismatic leadership. And it's not to say that charismatic leaders aren't serving, they're not, they can be servant leaders as well, but it's just a very leader focus. Like I want to be the star leader. I'm going to inspire people with my extraordinary vision. So that's also valid, but I guess just for me personally, what resonates with me is that human connection and creating an organization that will continue to thrive after you're gone.
Great. Yeah. So the sustainability is there. Yep. The serving others, serving your team, growing. It's interesting because it's a lot of leaders would say impact too, right? But I think as we look at the difference between for-profit, nonprofit, the for-profit leaders might have a much larger mindset of
Mhm.
bottom line, scoreboard, revenue, sales kind of focus. And in the nonprofit world, you do have sort of broader kind of leadership responsibilities or
Yeah.
desires,
But
it
I
seems.
think that is 100, obviously that's 100% true. And if you're really focused on the bottom line and the success of your company and, stock prices, shareholder value, revenue, I would still say the same type of leadership is what matters, because if you're growing and developing your people,
Good.
then you're going to positively impact the bottom line. You're going to reduce turnover, people either leaving because you need them to go because they're terrible, or leaving because they have better opportunities elsewhere. So if you're investing in people and growing them, I think you're going to have the most profitable company.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, and we've seen that story play out so many times. That's so good, and going back to that sustainability message too. You're setting up the company, the nonprofit or the for-profit for the capability of thriving far
Right.
into the
Yeah.
future as well. So very good perspective. Okay, so with each of our leader interviews, we focus on kind of three leadership elements. Um, and I'd like to jump into those with you. I know we're going to try to explore inclusion, we're going to try to explore stress, and we're going to try to explore unconscious bias. So let's start with inclusion, which I know you know well, not just because you study, not just because you practice it, but also you've brought all of that forward into a wonderful book called Inclusify. And so I'd love for you to share with us what inclusion really means and why it's so incredibly
Okay,
important.
thanks. So, yes, kind of similar to the servant idea, I would say that the best leaders are inclusive. So, for me, it's the definition of leadership as well. If you're not leading everyone on your team, if some people are left behind, that's like not good leadership, right? So that's what
Perfect. Yeah.
inclusion's about, is creating an environment where everyone can really be successful. And then I have the second kind of asterisk, while still being themselves. And so I think that's the challenge. Is I've never met a leader
Interesting.
who says, no, I don't want to be inclusive. I want to leave some people out. I don't want opinions. I want to make all the decisions. Like, give me a break.
Right.
I don't know people who say that.
No, you're
Some people
absolutely
do
right.
that, right? But even they don't think that that's what they want. But I think that's what's challenging, is especially in an increasingly diverse workforce, is being able to bring everyone along across differences. And so in Inclusify, rely on this theory called optimal distinctiveness theory. And it's a very,
You're going to have to
it's
explain that. Optimal
distinctiveness theory.
distinctiveness
And it's a famous
theory. Okay, love
theory
it.
in psychology that says, and it kind of takes an evolutionary view, but like the human nature has the desire to be different. Humans want to be unique and different. Unlike maybe other animals, like
Okay.
there's some benefit psychologically to our identities to have a unique sense of self, and that it's like part of childhood. I know we both have similar age kids, so you want to be somewhat different than your friends, your parents, and you grow up with this real human need.
And
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 siblings, oh my
siblings.
god. How many times do you hear that? I'm not that other kid. Like, yes, we know.
Yeah.
But that's the distinctiveness part of the theory, but it's only to an optimal level, because if you're too different, then now you're
Oh, very good.
excluded, you're not part of the group. You're weird.
Weird.
And weird is good, but it's, not too weird. So it
Can be good.
And so that's what the premise behind Inclusify is, that leaders, to really create the optimal work environment, need to focus on belonging, that sense of like, we are a group, a team, an organization. We all belong to it and we fit together, and we can still be ourselves. That whatever those unique identities that are really central to who you are and really important to you need to also be cared for and fostered by leaders.
It's fascinating. I had assumed Inclusify was another way of talking about DEI. And that's probably not fair at all, but that's what went through my mind when I initially thought about the concept without the book, without the explanation. I mean, so how do you kind of compare the two, contrast the two? Like, how does that work in your mind?
I would say that being an inclusive leader and recognizing, so if you think of DEI, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The I
Thank
part
you.
of inclusion is what I'm describing, is creating an environment where people are able to give input and maintain their unique identities and still belong, right? The diversity part,
Right.
and why it's so important in the book, and just for reality, is the fact that inclusion isn't that challenging when everyone's the same.
Right, of course, but there's no society, no culture where
Right.
that's true, right? homogenous
That's
companies
what
don't
I've
exist.
seen. Yeah, if you do a really small startup with, yourself and 3 of your buddies, or if you start a nonprofit with a few like-minded
Well,
individuals.
yeah, let's stick to
Yeah,
the nonprofit. Yeah, let's stick to the nonprofit concept, because in a nonprofit, I mean, when you start thinking about um, the staff, when you start thinking about the board, when you start thinking about clients that you serve, when you start thinking about donors, when you start thinking about the need to fit within the broader community, it's just impossible. There's never been a nonprofit that I've met that
right.
is homogeneous. It's the most diverse organization
Yeah,
on the planet.
yeah, exactly. So then with that, if that's your reality, and it is, right? Then inclusion becomes more important because you have to be more thoughtful about the different differences that people are bringing and how you're going to create an environment that supports that. And why?
Yep.
Like, I don't know. I did, so for part of the book, I did a lot of quantitative research, surveys and studies, but I also did qualitative research where I interviewed people. And some people said, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do it? What's their
Right.
problem? They're the ones that are
Why do
different.
I?
And it's like,
Fair.
yeah,
Yeah. Listen,
it's
that's
fine. You
great.
don't have to. But if you want to be successful, you need to. And so that's it. It's just,
Right. And if you want to
yeah,
serve your constituents, who are
yeah,
staff, clients, board, the
yeah,
community,
exactly. Then you need to.
wake
And then
up.
it's in your best interest. And, you'll grow and develop
Very
there.
good. In your
Yeah.
best
And you'll
interest.
enjoy it more. And that's like some of the findings that I think are so interesting, is that in fact, when people can be themselves, and we think about it from, people from a DEI perspective, we're talking about women and people of color and the LGBTQ plus community. But in fact, we all bring differences, and those identity groups are extremely important. And there's so much history in the US that women and people of color and women of color, and certainly the LGBTQ plus community, have not been treated with respect and treated equally. But when you create an inclusive environment, what's for me so amazing is that it also helps and supports that introvert who maybe doesn't want to speak up in meetings, or a person, people have a lot of visible and invisible disabilities that maybe they don't want to share, they don't want to talk about. But when you have an inclusive environment, it creates space for those as well. Or just, personality differences or anything. Just like we all, based on optimal distinctiveness theory, we all bring difference. And when you create an inclusive environment, everyone benefits.
I love it. Well said. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll put a period on that, with the hope and understanding that there's a lot more digging that the listener can do and pick up
Yay.
Inclusify.
Thanks.
It's a great book. Yeah. More people need to read it. Optimal distinctiveness
Yes.
theory. I
We'll link
gotta
it in the chat.
I gotta keep practicing it. Yeah, very good. Good idea. So let's jump into the second area, and
Uh-huh.
that's stress. And I actually, I was wanting to bring forward topics that are part of your expertise, right? So while I experience stress and have my own personal understanding of stress, I'm fascinated to kind of understand how you view stress in the context of leadership, in the context of organizational management, in the context of for-profit or nonprofit sort of experiences.
Yeah.
So, go for it. Tell me what stress is all about to
Yeah.
you.
So, okay, the why of why do I care about this, um, is
Perfect.
because people are stressed. I think,
Okay.
post
Okay.
pandemic, political polarization, people say social media. I don't know, but
Right. But it's financial, it's
mhm,
relational. everything from your siblings, your parents, your kids, your dog. I don't know, like stress is so
Yeah.
interesting because there's so many things in this
Yeah.
life that cause
Yeah. So
stress.
then if your team is stressed, and stress can be good or bad, right? There's this, if you liked optimal distinctiveness theory, get ready for this. The
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yerkes-Dodson model of stress is like this
Oh
bell-shaped
gosh.
curve, like that at really low levels of stress, actually workplace performance is low. If you think about doing a job you hate or reading a book you don't enjoy, you're not stressed, you're not interested, your performance is terrible. Or even a better example, I know you're such an athlete, that on the field,
Oh,
yes, when
thank
you're
you.
playing a team that you're just, if you ever go to a game and you're like, oh, this is an easy win, you show up, you're not at your best, you don't warm up as hard.
You play down to your
Yeah,
competition, we would say, right? Yeah, we didn't show up. We played down to the level of the
exactly.
other
So
team.
that's on the low end of the curve. And then you can imagine at the really high end of stress, it's really debilitating. Like if your hands are shaking, you're sweating, like you can't focus, um, you're freaking out, right? Then that's negative too.
Yeah, yeah. Me standing up in an audience of 1,000 when I was 25 trying to explain something I really didn't understand. That's
Or
not
like pretty
optimal.
much every human having to speak in public. It's pretty stressful for most people. But then there's
Right.
this huge curve
Yeah,
in
for sure.
between where actually stress facilitates better performance. And so my interest in this topic is first from a leadership perspective,
Yeah.
recognizing that if team members are experiencing stress, that is your issue, right? That's your opportunity as a leader to support them in a way that's going to keep them in the positive zone of stress rather than in the negative
Yeah.
zone. And so there's a lot of things that leaders can do to support their team, and just having conversations about stress. And then I kind of feel like stress has gotten a bad name. People only think of the distress, and it's like being
Good. Thank
villainized.
you. 100%.
we
Yeah.
we need the
Growth,
stress.
right? Yeah. Tension and stress have a very important role in building muscle of some sort,
Absolutely.
right?
And it's like great information to you as an individual when you're stressed about something to reflect on why. So I am experiencing something, right? I know I feel my
Right.
heart is racing, my pulse, that's my pulse. My stomach feels queasy, my mouth is dry. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? Oh, it's stress.
Yeah.
And then you can have the opportunity to think about why that is. And it's, for me, a great signal to say, this is something I care about. If I didn't care about it, I wouldn't be stressed. I would be on the low end of that curve. And so this is important.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah. You
Care.
care. You're stressed because you
Isn't it
care. Yeah. You give a
much
damn about it.
how horrible your world would be if you had nothing to be stressed about? You have no relationships,
Yet a lot of people would posit that that's
but
what they're
no,
looking
right?
for, a
I
stress-free
mean, if
life,
you think
right?
about it, that if you don't have stress, you probably don't care about anything either. And that feels like a lack of purpose or meaning in your life, which especially from a nonprofit perspective, people don't go into nonprofits because they want a life that lacks meaning or purpose. So stress and
Mhm.
nonprofits they just go together because we care so much about what we are doing. And that's
Good.
a
Yeah.
good signal. So
Yeah.
then it becomes, how can we psychologically, since I'm a psychologist, right, understand stress and label it in a more positive way? So I talked about my mouth is dry, my pulse is up, I'm kind of sweaty. Those same physiological markers we experience when we have excitement or passion. So part of stress is the way we're thinking about how we're feeling. And I don't know if this is like a, younger generation thing, but I hear young people, and I'll just say like college students talking a lot about anxiety. Oh, I have anxiety. And, maybe you just are excited and passionate, and not to diminish, folks' experience. And there are real things to be stressed out about. Let's, be honest.
Right.
But
Right.
not everything is negative stress. Like, some things are actually quite positive. And there's this famous study that was done on stress, and I didn't do the study, but stress and death. Like, this is a big deal. People who are more stressed, who report more stress, die younger. It was a huge study. You can imagine, longitudinal. They looked at
Sure.
using obituaries when people died following taking the survey years, 20, 30, 40 years earlier. But only the people who thought that stress had a negative impact on health were more likely to die. If you feel stressed, you think stress is actually a
Interesting.
good thing. Stress is, it's giving me energy. I mean, stress does a lot of great things for you too. If you,
Right.
back to our athletes, when you're stressed, your body actually performs at a higher level. You have adrenaline, you can run faster, you're physically stronger, your attentional focus, which, if you think of, like, you're looking at this huge periphery,
Yeah.
when you're stressed, it actually becomes more
Yeah.
narrow. And there's an evolutionary basis to
Right.
that. If you think of, fleeing from predators or like attacking prey or whatever, when you have,
That is
yes,
great. Yeah. Increases performance, builds
yes,
resilience, prepares you for your next kind of
yeah,
adventure in that same realm. In using that public speaking analogy, right? The more you practice that public speaking muscle, the less anxious and the more calm and the more
yeah,
capable you become. But if you never get over that hump, right? If you never hit that bell
yeah,
curve, and you'll never see the other
yeah,
side of it, right? It'll just always be this terrible, anxious
yeah,
thought in your mind, and not something like that you look back and say, why was I so
yeah,
nervous back in the
exactly.
day?
Well, that's the growth. And not even that's not even a traumatic experience, but you pointed out resilience. And that's, you can think of resilience using your muscle analogy, something you need to work on resilience, because at some point something will happen in your life. I'm sorry for everyone. This will happen. Yeah.
What?
Something
Wait,
bad's going to
what?
happen to you, and you're going to need to recover. And in fact, people who have gone through traumatic experiences are better able to deal with traumatic experiences in the future, because you actually do become more resilient by having experiences and making it through to the other side.
Yeah,
Thing.
yeah. And I don't want anyone to think that anyone here is ever making
For
light
sure.
of trauma, right? And there's varying degrees of trauma, but some of the most traumatic experiences I've heard about have led individuals to these, mountaintop moments where they've championed, they've succeeded,
Mhm.
they've overcome, become stronger. But again, I
Yeah,
don't
for
want to
sure.
make light of trauma in people's
Yeah,
lives.
absolutely. There's even a term for it called post-traumatic growth. And that people who've, not everyone, but oftentimes when people experience challenges, traumas, loss, they report, becoming more spiritual, becoming more connected to their beliefs, actually strengthening
Mhm.
relationships with friends and family, because you need to, right? And learning from that about the importance of those relationships. So, and that's like, those are, we're saying trauma, big trauma with a capital T, but even within the workplace, having challenges and experiencing as a team, getting through them, it strengthens the team and their bonds in the same way.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so before we leave this topic of stress, I just want to reconfirm my understanding of some of the basic tenets of it, right, that I've heard, which is that we can't always look at stress as a
Yeah.
negative, that some level of stress is both necessary,
Yeah.
important, and helpful, and use stress to help understand the why there, what's creating the stress, and you know, is it good for me? Is it bad for me? And what can I do to maybe mitigate that in the
Sure.
future, or right? So what
Yeah,
is that right? Did
I
I
think
get it
all of those
wrong?
things. And, some of it is, it's called the cognitive appraisal part of stress. And so I say this to my kids all the time, poor kids, but they say, oh, I'm so stressed about this game. And so this is just a concrete example to, reiterate what you just said. But
Perfect.
so I say, you're stressed about this game. There's all this great information. Well, what does that mean? First of all, you really care about this team and this game. It's an important game to you. And that's really great to know because you're spending a lot of time practicing, performing.
Right.
And isn't it good to know that you actually care about this? And
Right.
is it stress or are you just like really excited about playing this other team because they're the most challenging team you've played? And so if you think about it as like you're really excited. Usually this is where the kids roll their eyes at me. Like,
yeah. No, Mom,
I'm actually
scared.
Yeah, terrified, and excited, and use that stress. Like it's gonna help you.
Yeah. Channel it.
It's gonna help, and it's in those short term, like the stress of the game is actually a really different thing than the chronic stress that people experience, the ongoing, everyday kinds of stress that are a new issue in evolutionary time. Usually you're just like happily rolling around, eating food, relaxing. Every once in a while, a predator attacks you. You have to be stressed. But I think maybe and this is just one thing we didn't talk about, is those just people's chronic stress contributes to like more of the negative, detrimental aspects of stress. And why the only reason I'm throwing this in at the 11th hour here is because I feel like that's, from an organizational perspective, that's the leadership issue, is you're not going to reduce these big stressors. Oh, we have this big project, this big presentation. But if you can reduce the ongoing stressors in the office, a lack of respect, interpersonal treatment that's negative, a really critical environment, that's actually going to be the most helpful for your team.
Good. Perfect. Great way to and the 11th hour proved to be very helpful there. Yeah. Okay, so let's now jump into the third and final area. And this is the area of unconscious bias, which over the course of hiring staff in my professional career, I have realized and have been told that I have an unconscious bias. And initially, I was offended. Like, no, I don't. That's not me. That can't be me. Then I kind of woke up and realized, yeah, I do. But then I also realized it's impossible not to have some level of bias because we all come from our own unique backgrounds and situations and have been influenced by events and people. And we're human, right? So, of course, we bring that out when we try to evaluate particular candidates, maybe in the hiring scenario, right? But you've written a lot, studied a lot, practiced a lot, the idea of unconscious bias in terms of evaluating leaders and in other ways. So I'm excited to learn your perspectives on unconscious bias.
Sure. So I feel like I'm just really hitting the obscure psychology references today, but just like all the other things, unconscious bias is just a paired association that you've been exposed to over and over again through your life based on your upbringing, just like you said. And so when you think of a surgeon, most people think of a male. And actually, my son Kyle was just telling me this story. He said he learned in school that when you think of a doctor, is what they told him, because they were teaching about unconscious bias, you think of a male. And Kyle came home and said, hey, I just learned this thing in school today. It reminded me of your, what you do, but I've never even had a male doctor. So, and in fact, it's true. I mean, maybe because he's a kid, I guess, and all of his pediatricians have been women. And in fact, this is just the one doctor the office we happen to go to. There's 2 nurses, and both of them are men. And so he thought the whole thing he was learning in school was bunk, because the stereotype is, you think of a doctor or surgeon, you think of male. When you think of a nurse, people think of a female. And he was like, that's so weird. I don't think that. But I share this example because I love talking about Kyle, but also just because that's how you get unconscious bias, is from what you see. So if you had a really different life experience, yours are going to be different.
That's right.
But what our brains tell us is, when you see, and I'll just stick with the male doctors because that's probably more common for most people, male doctors and female nurses, you don't only think that doctors tend to be men. Unconsciously, and with the brain, the way our synaptic connections work, is you also think doctors should be men because the world functions.
Yeah. Or are better when they are
they should
men.
be. If it shouldn't be, they wouldn't be.
If they are and they should be, then there's a reason.
So they're better.
Right. So your brain is just telling you all kinds of
Yes. And
falsehoods.
No one admits this, right? Like,
right.
No,
that's not me.
I would never think that.
I would never.
Yes. And that's why it's unconscious bias. Okay. I have met people who say, no, they actually should be. Doctors are better. I would never let a woman operate on me. I would never let a woman fly the plane, run the country. Those people, that's conscious bias. The unconscious bias is just like, if you tend to see this a lot.
It's conscious, but they're just unconscious.
Yes, exactly. And so if you don't believe this, there's tests you can do online, like the IAT, the implicit associations test, that are reaction times test. You click a button on your computer and it'll show a picture of, let's just say, a doctor, and then a picture of a female, or a picture of a gender, and a woman or man, and then a picture of good or bad, kind or caring, and how quickly you click the key indicates, if you hold that association, you click it faster. So your reaction time indicates your level of unconscious bias. There's no reason to do that. It doesn't matter if you have more or less unconscious bias. At least from my view, what matters is your behavior and how you act on it. And if people point it out to you, Chris, you're unconscious biased, then I think for me, the best response is yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have practices in place to hire, promote, evaluate leaders and team members in a way that's free from bias, because we know we have it. So,
or as free as possible.
So like possible. If you remove names from resumes, you can't be biased, right? Because not on name anyway. You could be biased on other things. Oh, they played baseball. They must be great.
Yeah, right. I mean, any number of things, right? Oh, they went to this college. Oh, they only worked at this place for 6 months.
You have this gap on their resume.
Like, just there's so many things that are clues that can lead you to the wrong conclusion. Now, maybe they lead you to the right conclusion too, but the idea is you just see certain things and you automatically make assumptions based on your biases, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the risk, is that you're going to make bad decisions because you're operating on assumptions that lack validity, right? So if you knew this is what characteristics we want to hire on, then you should hire on those characteristics and promote on. And so then, I say for hiring, I think it's actually a little bit easier. What's more challenging is when you're working with someone, because then your assumptions feel more valid. You know that person. And, in the realm of leadership, one big difference that we often see is the evaluation of male and female leaders, that women are held to expectations to align with their gender role and the leader role. So as a female, you expect, and people, you can do the reaction time test. Okay. People think women are nicer than men. They're kinder, they're more caring. they're maternal. Why is this? Because women are their moms, right? So these are gender role expectations for women that are universally held. Everyone has them, but most people think consciously and unconsciously these things are true. And so when women in the workplace, and especially in leadership roles, behave in ways that maybe don't support those, I'm a
Aligned with
leader,
that? Yeah.
so I'm going to, my leadership style is to be direct. I am, numbers person. I'm aggressive on success, like that they're penalized because of that violation of their gender role. Like you seem so much meaner when and I even get this as a professor. I'm so much meaner than the other professors because I'm a woman professor being mean. I have the same,
Right.
I use the
Harsh.
same exam as all the other professors, but my exam feels harsher, even though it's identical exam, because they got it from a
That's
woman.
great. I mean, that's a great example. Yeah,
It's
not great.
terrible.
It's just a great example. Very,
So I
very
always think
good.
of that
Yeah.
when
Yeah, I
I
understand.
hear people talk about women leaders, like, oh, I don't know, I've heard I'm going to try not to use bad language on your channel here, but she's,
Please. No one will ever listen, or maybe they will
she's such
listen
a
more if they're
hard
using some.
tushy. I don't know. Or she's like so strict, right? Um, and then just like for myself, when I think that about a woman leader, I double, I check myself and say, if that same behavior were exhibited by the male leader, would I have that same reaction, or do I just hold her to a different expectation?
Right,
Um,
right. And when you say a male leader, then you could drill down even further. Sort of a white male
yeah,
leader of a certain age, or an African American
yeah,
leader of a certain age, or a Hispanic or Latina leader. Like all of a sudden you just start. It can be age, it
yeah,
can be ethnicity, it can be gender, and then it can
yeah,
get very complicated because in your mind, you're lining up 4 or 5 different characteristics and trying to associate it with, a
yeah,
TV character you saw back in the
yeah.
80s.
I know, yeah.
I don't know.
And
It's so
if
weird.
anyone doesn't believe it, just think, and if you're a man or woman, it doesn't matter. Think about the last time a male colleague or leader cried in front of you and how you
Yeah, yeah.
reacted. Because people react just as negatively to men violating their gender role of, women are supposed to be caring and
Right.
maternal.
100%.
Men are supposed to be agentic and controlled, right? And men can express anger. If you scream at people, it's like, but
That's
if you
okay.
cry, like, and I'm guilty of this, like, it's something I think is wrong. I
Come
know,
on,
stop. That's my
Pete.
husband.
Right.
Stop crying. Kyle, man up, right? Like those, you never say that
Right.
to,
Man up.
so it's just the same thing on the flip side. When a woman yells, you're like, she must be mad.
Well, okay, so one of the key takeaways for me is I always think of unconscious bias in the hiring
Mhm.
process. That's
Yeah.
where I'm sort of fixed in mindset. I can't escape this idea. That's where I need to
Yeah.
eliminate the unconscious bias. But you're opening up my world a little bit by saying, like, hey, hiring is just
Yeah.
one of so many leadership related tasks and roles that are
Yeah.
affected by unconscious bias, and so it's working collegially, it's in the
Yeah.
promotion arena, it's in
Yeah.
all of
Or
these things,
assigning
right?
people to clients. You have a really big, high profile client. Who do you choose? Who do you assign to that client? The person who you think is
Right,
going to do the best job,
right.
right? Or the person who fits in best with the client. Those are areas where unconscious bias can creep.
Well, clearly it's merit based in everything that
Yes.
we do, in every sector, especially government. It's
Merit
all
is number
about
one.
merit based.
That's what I hear.
Merit.
So
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I
the
think
rumor.
the hiring is maybe it's the most important, because if you don't get people in the door, you never have to worry about promoting and mentoring and, who you're going to put into the high potential program because you didn't hire them. So you got to hire them. That's, hiring without unconscious bias and on merit. the most important
Right.
part of that. And then once they get there, now it's like you have, going back to the inclusion part and the mentoring part, it's in your best interest to create an environment where they can thrive.
I love it. That's terrific. Yeah. Any other advice or recommendations for our leader listeners as we kind of try to help them or assist them in the area of inclusion, stress, and unconscious bias? Any final advice or guidance that you want
Yeah,
to
I
give?
mean, I don't know. I hear this a lot, but like, I think leadership starts with self-leadership. And so, look inward first, continue the learning journey. Like, you're listening to a podcast, you're pretty open-minded, like learning-oriented
Very good.
person. Keep keep it up. Like,
Yep.
that's where all growth happens, is by focusing on yourself, making sure your mental health and well-being is taken care of first. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to control those other things, like, monitoring your unconscious bias and being inclusive and trying to help people in your team not be stressed out. Like, how do you do that when you're really suffering? So I guess take care of yourself first.
That's it. Wonderful. That's the best advice I've heard. So thank you. Thank you, Stefanie, for sharing your expertise, your wisdom with us. It's been extraordinarily helpful to me, and I know it's going to be extraordinarily helpful to so many people that plug into this podcast. So much here for the audience to unpack. No doubt that it will really be a positive impact to so many leaders today and into the future who have the opportunity to listen to this and learn from this. But that brings us to the end of our podcast today. I know. And just so grateful to all of you out there for joining us and listening. I want to encourage you to please subscribe to the podcast. Please also look out for, subscribe to Mastering Fundraising, which is a similar interview format where we focus on conversations like we do here with the most accomplished nonprofit leaders in the sector and learn from them, from their experience and expertise, and grow in our own leadership capabilities. But until next time, we just wish all of you the best and encourage you all to do what you can for this world by leading for good. Thank you all, and see you very soon.
Thank you for joining us for this most recent episode of Lead for Good. Our passion is helping nonprofit leaders reach their full potential as leaders, and we sincerely hope this episode has been edifying for you. Please subscribe to this podcast to not miss any of our Lead for Good conversations. We welcome your feedback, suggestions, and comments via email at hello@fulcrumleader.com. Lead for Good is a production of Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership. Please visit us on the web at www.fulcrumleader.com. Until next time, we wish you all the best and encourage you to always lead for good.